Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Y-Axis Pod. I'm your host, Tristan Yver, and here with me today is James Hunsaker. He is the co-founder and CTO of Monad, although now he's on Category, which is the labs entity for the Monad blockchain. Really good to have you here with me today, James. I know it's a very eventful time for you guys, for all of you, so I'm glad that you were able to make the time to chat with us. And yeah, just thanks for being here. Good to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to meet you and do this podcast.
Amazing. Before I jump into the past, because I really do enjoy learning more about the guests and the things that brought them to where they are and what they're building now, I think maybe just starting with what is happening right now. So for the listeners, Monad has launched Testnet. I think it's the testnet with the most active apps that I've ever seen, at least. I haven't tracked metrics, but there are a lot of applications that are live on testnet. There are a lot of users. People are getting very emotional about testnet assets, which I've never seen before. They're like accumulating these things like real money. So my initial question for you is, how has this testnet launch been? Are you guys around the clock? Has load looked all right? What is the status?
Yeah, it's super exciting. It's kind of amazing, like how much like natural activity is there and real users. And I was getting into the fantasy top thing a little bit. I bought myself, but I didn't have enough mon to like buy anybody else. And what was it? A couple other, I just played with a few other apps, but the usage seems like real usage as opposed to like bots. There's not just a lot of like bot sort of usage. It's just natural usage, which is really cool. A lot of activity on Twitter. My feed is like probably like 80% Monad Testnet, which I know the algo is like biasing my feed towards that, but a lot of the people that have been there, a lot of the community's been there for a long time, and so I recognize a lot of the Twitter accounts and people and stuff from over a year ago, and they're still active, and I think that's like really cool.
That's a sign of a good community, for sure.
Yeah,
The
it's a good
fact that these
community.
people stick around is really, really impactful.
Yeah, I wish I could travel more. I see all these photos of these like Monad events and different places, and there's like small ones, there's little ones. Some are like 10 people, some are like 100 people or more, 300 people. I don't know, but I wish I could just like go to these things and hang out, drink beer with these people, and just have fun. But unfortunately, I'm kind of like tied to the
So are you just like
technology
in the
stuff.
gears with the oil on your hands, kind of wrenches tied to your
Yeah, I
hip,
just
or
can't
what's
really
the
spare
status?
any time to like get out there. But the network itself has been very stable. There's been no outage, no issues. I think the main challenge was the RPC side wasn't as optimized as it should be. Some of the deployments have been kind of clunky, rollouts of the validators and stuff like that. So those guys have been great. The initial set of validators, I think it was like 57 or something, like not entirely sure, but they've
That's a
been
good
really
initial
patient.
cohort. I mean, that's
What's
that's
that?
that's a really good initial cohort.
Yeah, and we're
Quite
always
a
getting
few.
hit up to like for more people to join, but it's just we need to make things smoother. I guess I may be sounding like kind of negative right now, but in my mind, I'm not really thinking about like what's working. I'm thinking about like what's not working. So
Mhm.
like when
No,
you
that's
ask me like
good.
how
That's
testnet's
good.
going, I'm just like I'm thinking about like everything that's not perfect or not performing well.
Yeah, tell me the
So yeah,
hiccups, what you're focused on.
just fixing
Yeah.
stuff, improving stuff, optimizing. So there's a lot of work yet to do before mainnet, and the team's working super hard. A lot of people are on 16 hours a day or more, just working nonstop. So, but that energy, like there's a lot of energy from the community, a lot of energy from all our partners, a lot of energy from the foundation side and everything. So like that, it's a lot easier to work hard when people when there's like energy around you. There's a lot of like, it's not, if you're like working hard and like nobody's paying attention, it's kind of, I guess maybe can be demoralizing or something, right? Like when there's all this energy, like you don't even feel like you're putting in all those hours or that you're putting all that time. So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
And the feedback cycles become much shorter because so many people are paying attention to what you're doing that if you fix something, all of a sudden there's 100 people like, woo, this is fixed.
Yeah.
It's kind of addictive.
Yeah. And the first week people were messaging me like, oh, this thing doesn't work, or that thing doesn't work. And, I was like, it's a kind of exciting, right? Like, you think of any sort of, technology company or trading company or something like that, when there's like when it becomes busy, you get a lot of energy. It's those trading days where like volumes shoot through the roof or something that like, the team is like reinvigorated. And so it's kind of just similar to that.
Before asking more about Testnet, how has that transition been for you where you were engineering for trading teams, for trading systems where the feedback is very much contained within that team to now having users and external parties and interfacing with this whole outside world? How has that change been for you?
Yeah, it's definitely different. Couple things is like in our trading engines at Jump, we didn't care if they just died. There was not this sort of like necessarily a focus on uptime. I mean, we didn't want them to die, but like you have on your connection with the exchange, like cancel and disconnect set, and so the exchange will cancel all your orders, sort of thing for you when it detects the connection's gone, and you have like all this backup sort of stuff. So if an engine like dies, you might have some position that you need to click out of or something, but it's not. You're not really that fearful of it. Whereas here with blockchain, like people expect 100% uptime on this thing, right? Like any outage, any disruption is going to get a ton of visibility, and it's just that just adds a whole another level of like rigor that you need to have and carefulness and whatever to make sure that that you get that uptime. So it's probably like the standard for this downtime is probably even worse than like major websites like Netflix or something, right? Like Netflix gets a little bit outage, but if people are going to cancel their subscriptions, probably not really, but any outage in blockchain just is probably a lot more painful for some people, certainly.
Is this more stressful than building for trading? Because I know trading is incredibly stressful because there's so much money on the line. Which have you found to be more stressful?
Yeah, this is more stressful. I would say trading is just, especially like HFT, is just a long grind. And so you're just grinding and grinding. You're trying to get smarter. You're trying to get faster. Your competitors are getting smarter. Their competitors are getting faster. And so you're just trying to keep that edge. But it's not like sort of like big bang sort of developments usually. It's just a slow grind. I worked on like hardware trading system at Jump with some other people. It took like year and a half to like actually go from like concept to production, and that's just a long time to like be working on something and not see like the fruit of your labor at all. To be fair, we've been working on Monad for a long time, but we went through some different sort of cycles. The first few months are really just like meetings with lawyers, fundraisers, not fundraisers, VCs and other sorts of people, fundraising. And then you spend a lot of time hiring, which is not, we did do hiring at Jump, but there was a lot of like support from the company itself for that. They have all the staff to do that sort of stuff. So you're building this out from scratch. We tried a couple different architectures, which we ultimately abandoned. Like it seems like it's been a long time, but like if you actually like calculate how much time is in the current system, it's probably around the same what I said with that trading system, like maybe like a year and a half to 2 years of effort. But we're Keone, Eunice, and I are first time founders, so A lot of mistakes made along the way, learning things that all first-time founders probably learn and don't expect as somebody who's just been an employee, for other companies before. So
Also a really big company that has such a support network around every function. So you guys came from an environment where you could primarily focus just on the thing that was in front of you, and now you're in an environment where everything depends on you, and if you guys aren't doing it, it's just not happening anymore.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that stuff is just very distracting, right? Like, especially on the engineering side, you're trying, and this is not just for me, it's for our other employees, other engineers as well, where you're trying to build a system and you're trying to be deep in thought, and then you're like, oh, I got to do an interview, or I have to have a meeting, and this sort of stuff. And yeah, that happens at big companies too, but it's just a challenge to like stay and just crank out stuff in a startup as opposed to a big company where you have all this, like you said, all the support and all these people around there. It's almost like holding your hand, babysitting you, sort of thing on those sort of functions.
But I feel like the founder role is really just like being willing to shovel the shit that no one else wants to shovel, in many ways.
Yeah. I don't really think we don't. Monad is a flat sort of organization, and we try to avoid too much hierarchy. Trading somewhat is like that, even though I worked at banks too, which obviously have a ton of layers, but you don't really see those layers. Like, they don't exist in your sort of day to day. The trading team is basically like some traders, some quants, and some technology people, right? And they're pretty much given in Jump or in banks or whatever. They're pretty much given just free reign to do what they want, assuming they following the risk procedures and the standard sort of stuff to protect the firm. But we kind of just carried that sort of style over to Monad and just try to keep things as flat as possible.
Has it worked? What's been your experience with that so far?
Yeah, I think it works pretty well. I'm not a big fan of like one-on-ones or these sorts of things. I think like meetings and that sort of stuff is more. It just results in sort of like weird timing. Like, oh, you have a meeting, so maybe you don't bring up an issue until the meeting. So maybe the issue could have been brought up like a day earlier or something, or people don't prep for meetings properly. Like meetings are not meant to be like dissemination of information. It's meant to be like discussion. So like dissemination should occur before the meeting. So there's all these sort of things. So I think historically, in trading, you really just don't have that many meetings. You might have like a once a week sort of meeting, and that's basically it, right? Everyone's always just kind of continuously working and communicating, and I think that's probably just the best way to really like.
So have you guys sort of taught new employees that system where time is to be used efficiently, even though the hierarchy is pretty flat?
Yeah, it's challenging. I would like to reduce the number of meetings we have still in Monad. Like, that's my goal. I guess I'm just kind of like dumping random sort of like management philosophy on you here. I'm not sure if that's what you.
No, that's good. That's. I mean, the point of this podcast is for people to get a window into startups, into builders, into founders, so that they can conceptualize what that means, right? Because for most people, they don't really have a real conception of that. So all of this is super valid.
Yeah. I think like, the thing with flatness too is it's not, you shouldn't have to pull rank to like get the proper outcome, right? Like it should be more like if you have as a more experienced member of the team, you should be able to convince other people of why something should be done a certain way. And so try to use that sort of like I'm in charge sort of thing as a last resort to like make good decisions. And that way people do the discourse and like working together and trying to convince each other, leads to better outcomes. a lot of times I'll just play devil's advocate. Like I think I tweeted this once, like devil's advocate is an underappreciated role, right? Like devil's advocate is a very important role. I think people just agreeing with each other is not that productive at all. Did you ever watch that movie with Brad Pitt? It was the zombies. World War Z.
World War Z. That'll be
Yeah.
like a long time ago.
And there's this scene where like Israel had built like the proper defense for this zombie invasion, and they're the only ones that were like prepared for the thing, and they're having this meeting. They're like, "Well, why did you guys think of this or something?" And they're like, "Well, we always had in the room a guy whose job was to like advocate against the collective sort of like thought, right?" And so I kind of see my role. One of my roles in Monad is to be like that devil's advocate. Like when everyone else is saying, "Yeah, we should do this," I'll just chime in and be like, "Well, are you sure? I don't think we need to do that." You know. And
well, I think that's a very trader. I think that's a very trading firm type of behavior, right? Where everyone is always questioning other people's assumptions, and there isn't, at least from the trading firms I've seen, it leads to a lot more ability to have open discussions versus just agreeableness and sort of like follow on with other people's thoughts. So maybe that's like part of it.
I think that is part of that. I think, what is it, Bridgewater is like that taken to the extreme sort of thing where people are just like very rigorous about like you have to justify everything, you have to explain everything. You can't walk into a meeting and be like, "Oh, I think this is the right thing to do." Well, why? Well, because
they're trying to train the rational thought. But that I do think though, and maybe this is just because how I operate. I don't know how this works at an organizational level, but I do think there is, especially in crypto, a lot of space for intuition as well. So I think like being able to combine rational thought and use it to at least somewhat explain the intuition is good. But there are also leaps of faith in crypto that can get you pretty far. So it's like finding a balance between the two.
Yeah, I just think of like intuition is basically like what's happening in your subconscious, right? Like your brain is basically, like a neural network behind the scenes, and your subconscious is just kind of like churning all day long. It's like when you're trying to remember who's that actor in that movie, right? And you're like, I can't remember who that actor is, damn it, and like 3 hours later, you're doing something totally unrelated. You've moved on from that discussion. That person that you were talking to is not even in the room anymore, and it just pops into your head, right? And so, what was going on? Like, what was happening in your brain that led to that thing just being recalled? It's probably just in the background. Your brain is just churning, searching through the indexes of your knowledge to try to find that thing, and then it rises. Like there's some sort of mechanism by which like. It rises from your subconscious to your conscious, and then you're like, "Oh wow, I just thought of that," sort of thing. And I'm actually a big believer in this, and I used to do this thing with there's always this joke when you're younger, like school, like I'm gonna sleep with the calculus textbook, and I'm gonna wake up like the next day, and like I'm gonna have absorbed some of the material by osmosis or something from the textbook, right? Mm-hmm. I remember joking with friends about that, but I think there is some truth to that. Where like, if you go to bed, and the last thing you did for like the half hour before you went to bed is like scroll through TikTok, you probably just wasted like 8 hours of brain power while you were sleeping. What you should probably do is, and this is what I often do, is just think about a problem right before I go to sleep. Mm-hmm. Maybe read a paper, or maybe read some code on my phone or something, which is extremely painful to like open up GitHub on your phone and try to like scroll through, but I will do that. And just kind of like prime the brain for some sort of like thinking session, and then you fall asleep and you wake up in the morning, and I don't know, it works for me. I don't know, maybe
I know. I think there's a lot of truth to this. I had a very, very similar experience recently. I was watching this show on Apple TV called Severance, and my wife and I were binge watching it. We watched it right up until we went to bed for 2 nights in a row. And both of those nights, when I woke up or had some moments during the night where I was more conscious, I was fully thinking about what all the pieces of the show were and what the potential sort of catalyst or climax of the show was going to be. So it's exactly what you're describing. I think there's a lot of truth to this.
Yeah, I think there's like movies. I'm not familiar with that show, but there's movies certainly where there's the jokes that are at like the surface level, and then there's the jokes that are like hidden, right? Like almost like the jokes were like only the actor and the director kind of knew, or the actors and director kind of knew they were there, or the writer knew they were there. And like when you watch the movie the first time, you only get the jokes at the surface level, right? And definitely I've noticed like falling asleep right after watching some of these movies. Like I'll wake up the next day and I'll be like, oh shit, there was a joke there, and I didn't get it while I was watching it because it's so subtle. And those are actually the funniest jokes. So, like the subtle ones are the funniest ones in the movie. And it's pretty crazy. There's like I obviously was growing up in the 80s, a little bit older. And I go back and watch some of these 80s movies that I've seen probably like 20 times, and I still notice like new things in the movie. And I'm like, how have I seen this movie like tens of times over decades and not noticed this joke? It's like very, very super subtle. But yeah,
I almost think part of it in that regard is as our, I don't want to sound too woo woo, but as our consciousness changes over time, our perspective fixates on different things, and so we like see different angles that we didn't see. I mean, the obvious comparison is as a child into an adult. There's you start seeing like the sexual innuendos in the Disney movies and whatnot. You're like, ha ha ha.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Yeah.
But I do think that's definitely a thing where as we have more lived experience, we start relating to the things that we've seen in our lives more than just maybe what the director wanted to show or whatnot.
Yeah. I think movies are a big reflection of like humanity, and as you accumulate more experiences, you can identify more with. I'm not a big reader, so if I was, probably the same thing applies to books, but I'm just not a big like fiction reader, so. For me, it's movies, and you just kind of start to relate to some of these experiences. Like I don't know if you have kids, but I have kids, and like you don't when you're watching that sort of like seeing the parental sort of scenes in movies as a kid, you kind of like view it very differently than when you watch the same scene as a parent, right? And because now you've kind of maybe you don't have that exact experience, you have something close to it, and you can kind of relate a little bit of empathy, but yeah.
So I will note though, I think this is a good call out for me because I should stop scrolling Twitter right before going to sleep and actually read something or do something a little bit more productive. I think generally it would lead to being healthier overall. How do you balance, you're in this core engineering work where you're just in this code, so deeply focused, anything's a distraction, gets you out of that mindset, costs you a lot of time. How do you balance that with having to manage people, just keeping an eye on what people are saying on Twitter to make sure nothing's broken, watching the Slack? Like, what is the system you've created to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely trade-offs that I make intentionally where I intentionally leave something in a suboptimal sort of state because I just think that it's not as important as some of the other things. The one thing I don't do is really read my email at all. I'm kind of past email.
Post email.
Yeah, as a professional sort of communication. I won't say the name, but somebody posted on Twitter yesterday that they don't like people who don't respond to emails or something. And I'm like, well, like what is this? Like I don't even read email. So that's kind of some evolution. The thing with crypto that's crazy is you got Twitter, you got Slack, you got Telegram, you got Discord. There's so many things to jump between a lot of the companies more like business sort of relationshipy things or on like Slack integrations. There's a ton of Telegram groups, of course. I'm sure you're the same way. You just have endless sort of Telegram groups. Especially you go to a conference, you go to a conference, you leave with 100 more Telegram groups than when you came, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's just nuts. Discord more for community, that sort of thing. And so, like, you could literally spend your entire day just flipping amongst these platforms, trying to keep up with all the messages that are going on. And that's what the community, managers and BDs, that's what they're doing, right? Like they're just nonstop, sort of like real time, juggling all these things. Yeah, I think for engineers, just engineers in general don't like all the stuff that goes into being part of a business. They just want to write code, right? They want to build stuff, write code. They prefer asynchronous communication instead of synchronous communication. They just want to think. They're not, a lot of them nowadays are not big on in-person sort of meetings or that stuff either. Engineers tend to be like introverts. So, it's just, I try to just squeeze in thought whenever I can, and just, it's really hard for me to read stuff. I'll just read like every other line sort of thing when I'm reading a paper and just see if anything stands out. So, but yeah, it's just really hard. Like, I'm sure it's just really hard to like keep up with everything. And today I've done zero engineering work. It's pretty late here, and so I'm still going to try to squeeze in some before bed after we done recording this. But yeah, it's just really hard to do it.
Hey, Monad CTO going to bed at 3 a.m. Bullish. But do you set aside blocks? Will you block out your calendar if you have to work on something, or it's more internal rather than systematic like that?
No, I can't do it like that. So my brain doesn't work that way. I think there's like architecture. There's like coming up with ideas, coming up with algorithms. You can't control the rate at which you do that. Like you just have no control. Like Einstein coming up with theory of relativity, it's not like you can say, okay, I'm going to come up with theory of relativity and I'm going to have it done in 6 months. Like it just doesn't work that way. I'm not saying that we're doing anything of that significance, but it's just like original sort of thought comes when it comes, right? You can't force it. In fact, if you try to force it, you probably slow it down more than you accelerate it, right? And then there's like execution. Okay, we think this is the architecture that should be done for this part of the components or whatever. And now all I need to do is write the code. So that's typing out all the code, writing the unit tests, communicating to other people what the interface is going to be. All that sort of stuff, that execution stuff requires far less brain power than sort of the like original thought. So that stuff is easier to schedule. That surface level sort of thinking, that more shallower thinking is very easy to schedule. You can schedule that around meetings, and you just got to keep track of what I got to do. Okay, I got to write this piece of code. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to write the test. Okay, the next day I'm gonna go over with this other engineer and like integrate it into his component, that sort of thing. It's easy to schedule that stuff, and yeah, there's still some overhead. Like, a meeting that's an hour doesn't consume an hour of your time. It actually consumes like you're going to go to the meeting. Maybe you got to go to the bathroom first, whatever. You go to the meeting, you have your thing. You're still thinking about the meeting afterwards. It's hard to switch back into the other domain that you were working on. So, meetings are costly, but that aside, like you still kind of like know what you need to do, and it's just a matter of execution. The original thought stuff, yeah, you just have no control over it. I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is you just kind of need to prime the brain. Like there's strategies for priming the brain to think about things, and you don't have control over specific timing, but you can influence the speed at which you kind of do that just by priming the brain when you go to bed.
When you have a realization, do you just it stays in your brain and you're able to kind of recall, or do you have to like get a pen and paper or your computer and kind of write out the logic immediately? How do you capture when that happens?
Yeah, I think the when I was younger, I was just relying on the probability that I would discover the solution again if I forgot it.
Hmm.
And so I just kind of knew that um, like you set your keys down. You don't have to remember where your keys are as long as you know that's a regular path you're gonna pass through, and so you'll see them again, right? So like you don't need to remember sort of like detailed piece of information if you know you're going to be following that path again and again. Whereas I think that was sometimes anti-productive to me when I was younger, where it may take me weeks to kind of rethink of what I was, or get back to where I was, sort of that moment of enlightenment. And so, yeah, now I would say I'm a little bit more careful about it. I do kind of note things down more often and write them down, but it's still easy to forget, especially when you're dealing with tons of, I use GitHub issues to like basically take notes. And one thing that I started with at Monad was just like a journal, a daily sort of journal. This is actually something that one of the guys at Jump used to do, and I used to laugh at him for doing it. Kind of make fun of him a little bit, give him a hard time, but I think it's pretty valuable to just like write down, what experiment you ran, why you ran it, what were the results, and you'll be surprised. Like maybe you go back and look at 20% of those, like the other 80% you never look at again, but those 20% might be super valuable. And
Also context for new engineers, right? Like it gives them a way to get up to date on what the progression has been.
Yeah, you can point out to other people. You can go look like, oh, what's the compression ratio for this algorithm for Ethereum block data, for example? Oh, well, I did that like 6 months ago. I was playing with that one weekend. Here's all the data, right? So just kind of putting it as a daily journal with it searchable is probably the less. If you try to organize it, if you try to like keep it into like a taxonomy of like problems, solutions, all that sort of stuff, that there's a lot more overhead. So I just kind of treat it as like this is 2025, March, whatever. That's what I did that day, and just hope that text search and whatever will lead me back to
some keyword search or whatever.
Yeah, keyword. Yeah, exactly.
Get back to it. How has so if I recall correctly, were you the sole engineer at the very? I mean, were you the sole engineer at the very beginning that was working on everything? And how many of you guys are working on Monad now, like on the blockchain side of things?
Yeah, I mean, Keone and Eunice were both. They both have CS degrees, so we were at the very, very beginning. We were writing. I think Keone and Eunice were writing some scripts that generated like transactions, transaction data, swaps, ERC20s, sends, all this sort of stuff. And we were benchmarking. I think the first thing we did was just benchmark some of the existing Ethereum clients like Geth. I would go into Geth and remove the sort of limits. Like Geth can actually run much faster than it does, right? Like Ethereum is limited by its parameters, not by the actual software. So if you go in there and you kind of remove that gas limits, the timing, all that sort of like those numbers out of the code, Geth can actually do a lot more transactions per second. I think with no optimization back then, it could do like 600 TPS. I may be totally making that number up, but
that's a lot.
Geth could run like 600 TPS, right? And Ethereum's doing like these days 150 to 200. I haven't looked recently, but every 12 seconds. So yeah, Geth can do a lot more TPS than what it's set to. So yeah, we were just kind of looking at that. We were looking at databases. So that was me at first only, and then summer of 2022, we made our two first hires, and they're still with the company. And our process for hiring was not great. Like, we're just kind of fumbling around. But they turned out, like, it was mostly just like pure luck. Like, we just got two really awesome engineers.
Nice.
One was off Angel List. I can't remember where we found the other one, but those sort of startup job boards are good for selecting people who already have risk tolerance for joining a startup. You know, they're basically on that board, so they've already selected into that sort of type of job. Whereas if you go to like Google or something and try to hire somebody to a crypto startup, right, they're gonna be like, what the hell? Like,
Yeah, good luck.
here I got my nice cushy job, I got a stable salary. Google is a $1 trillion company.
I work 15 hours a week.
I work 15 hours a week. Yeah. It's just hard to convince people who have like are already in a like really secure situation to take a chance, unless they want to. You know, there are some people who are just like really out there looking for risk, taking risk and trying to get reward, sort of thing. But
Did you try to recruit that segment and realize it was kind of a wasted effort, or this is just known?
yeah, I mean, I'm kind of biased against big tech, anyways. The problem with those companies are, you know, very small percentage of the employees are making a large percentage of the revenue, right? The number of people who work on like ads at Google, it's not percentage wise, it's a very small percentage of the company, but it's like almost all the revenue, right? So, and those people were, you know, I had a friend that was working there, and he's like, yeah, I can make this small tweak to this machine learning algo, and it resulted in this point something percent improvement in click-through rate, and Google makes another $50 million. You know, it's like crazy. It's like that sort of influence there. But I've mentioned this, I think, other places before, but it's like you get a really lot of smart people, like people who did like really original work in grad school or that sort of thing. And they go to Google and they end up on one of these teams in the middle of Google that like basically don't do anything. Well, don't do anything of any significance. And they sit there for 5 years working in this team, and they don't learn anything. They're stagnant, right? They're not learning. They're not growing as engineers or as people. And some of them will wake up and they'll be like, oh, you know, I realize I've been wasting all this time. I need to get out of here, sort of thing. And I feel bad for them, honestly. Like, I feel just sad for them because they're stagnant, you know, and it's hard to go from stagnant back to like a very active sort of learning engineering role.
It's the golden handcuff meme, right? It's like the big tech golden handcuff meme.
Yeah. And I think they're hiring those people to just keep them off the market, right? Keone said this before as well. Like, they're not really hiring them because they want them to do work. They're hiring them so they're not doing work for somebody else. Right?
That's really pernicious. Holy shit.
Yeah. That's
just for like humanity. That's so bad for humanity in itself.
Yeah, it's very bad for humanity. And, you know, it's even worse than that, because at one time there was that big lawsuit where they were colluding to keep wages down. Right. So not only were they hiring you to keep you off the market, they were also colluding not to hire amongst each other so that to depress the wages, so it cost them less to keep you off the market. That said, I mean, there are good teams there. We tried to hire a younger engineer that had spent a couple years in the kernel team, Linux kernel team there. He had done some very interesting work, some stuff that would be applicable to us. We ultimately weren't able to hire him because he was kind of doing like a PhD at Stanford on the side or something. I can't remember the details, but he's like, okay, I don't really want to. At that time, we were very biased towards hiring people into New York. And
has that changed?
Yes.
Is it still all in person, or is engineering now more remote possible? What's the status?
Yeah, it's like I would say 50 to 70% are in New York.
Hmm.
Our compiler team is mostly Europe. We have some other engineers in Europe, non-compiler engineers in Europe as well. We have some people in Florida.
Hmm.
So they're the same time zone, but they're not, not in New York. Some people in Canada. Um, but yeah, we, I think like 5 days a week in the office is not necessary. I think that's overkill. But it is good to get in the office like 2 to 3 days a week and whiteboard sort of things. I think the efficiency of communication there. But again, it shouldn't be like, oh, the thing I'm going to do tomorrow, I need to have a meeting for today. Like these meetings are more about like strategy, like architecture. It's more like longer term.
Yeah.
Like this is what we want to do over the next 2 months, sort of thing. This is what we think the architecture should be. That's what those in-person meetings are. Like I don't think you need to have an in-person meeting to discuss like, oh, like how's my component going to integrate with your component that we're already in the process of developing, sort of thing. And so that you can just do asynchronously over Slack or just hop on a Zoom really quick.
For the people joining your team, do you have any specific prerequisites for them on the engineering side, or is it just to be a really good engineer because then they can learn whatever they need to learn?
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects to hiring somebody. One is just like raw intelligence. Um, you just there's people out there who like to do puzzles, statistical puzzles. They like to do programming coding challenges. There's a lot of people just like always seeking, their brain is just naturally seeking like challenge, and they just kind of have some raw intelligence. Another aspect is domain specific knowledge. Like maybe somebody is an expert at the Linux kernel, so they've just been working on it for 5 years, or 10 years or whatever, and you need somebody that has that sort of expertise. And yeah, a smart person could pick it up, but it's still relatively challenging to pick up. There's a lot of nuance and stuff that you don't know. So another aspect is common sense. There's a lot of people who are smart but don't have common sense. I always make a joke about like the super smart sort of like mathematician living in his mother's basement. Basically can't go grocery shopping for himself. He can prove 100-year-old sort of hypotheses, but he, as a functional adult, he just lacks sort of common sense, right? So like just being able to have common sense is a huge sort of thing. And then just like drive, like what, like, do you really want to be there? Like, if you're just there for the paycheck, you're probably not only going to be unhappy yourself, you're going to make other people unhappy. And so I've never been a big fan of trying to convince people to join places where I've been, because like I would expect you to want to work there, right? Like if you don't see the value in working there, either for your career growth or your intellectual learning challenge, income, whatever, right? A domain specific knowledge you're going to learn or whatever. If you don't want to work there, I shouldn't have to convince you to want to work there. Like you should have came in wanting to work there. There's a lot of people who just like don't care. Like they just don't care where they work. They just want to do their 9 to 5, get their paycheck. Like they don't care whether they're working at Walmart or Target. Like they just don't care, right? Like they're the same thing to them. So I get really excited about people who are really excited about working at Monad, or when we were at Jump, working at Jump, or that sort of thing. I think people disagree with me that a little bit. I think Keone disagrees with me a little bit because he'll be like, well, the person doesn't really know that they, like, if they knew more, then they would want to work here, but they don't really know, right? So, like,
that's actually kind of what I was going to ask you. But the second part of my question was going to be, do you think that the excitement to work for a crypto company is in a better place than it was when you guys were starting out? I mean, obviously there's two components to this. One is Monad. It has gotten a lot of attention, has had very large fundraisers. People see it as a viable vehicle. But in general, do you think we're getting more talent into the space, or that still hasn't happened?
I think we are getting more talent because I do talk to some candidates and they're not active crypto users, but they played around with it. They went and downloaded a client. They looked at it. They maybe tried to do a transaction. So they're not, they're not like super into it, but it's out there and like people know it's out there. And anybody who's just a little bit curious these days will go and check it out. And so I think that percentage of like the population of engineers that have played with it at least a little bit or maybe spent a few hours on it has definitely gone up a lot and it continues to rise. So yeah, I would say that that's definitely a data point that I'm seeing amongst candidates is some level of experience, some level of knowledge. Sometimes they'll have the completely wrong idea, right? Like they'll be like, "Oh, I tried something on Solana and blah blah blah," and I'll be like, "No, you don't really understand what you're saying." But at least they tried. Like, they put a little bit of effort into it. So I wouldn't hold it against them if they don't know because they didn't really spend that much time. But at one point I didn't know either. So yeah.
Well, this is actually a really good segue for the listeners who may be engineers, may be interested, but don't really know. I'd love to get a sense of what Monad Testnet looks like now. Are all the core pieces of what you guys building plugged into it already? Are there other things that need to get plugged in before mainnet? Like what does the machine look like right now? And I guess perhaps what differentiates it from other EVM chains in the space or L2s or whatever.
Yeah, so it's broken into execution and consensus. The execution part is a fully Ethereum compatible execution client.
Which means you can like copy paste. If I have Aave on Ethereum, I can copy paste it, and it should work on Monad basically, or what does that mean?
It does work because our number one benchmarks that we replay all the time is Ethereum history. So, and we, after every block, we have a new Merkle root and we have the header and all that stuff, and we compare it. And so, like, the process will just die if it doesn't match what Ethereum has computed. So, from that aspect, it's 100% compatible. We have several jobs. We have jobs that replay like the entire history from Genesis all the way up until whatever the latest block we've downloaded is. And then we have jobs which kind of selectively replay different segments of history. So they start from a snapshot that's at that block number and then replay, let's say, 100,000 blocks or something. And the reason for that is because the performance varies a lot. Early Ethereum history is basically just people transferring ETH back and forth to each other. Right, like there's no smart contract usage, there's no Uniswap or Aave or any of that stuff. That didn't exist then. It's just people like transferring ETH around. And so the early Ethereum history with like almost no computational power, you can do like, I think Silkworm, which is single threaded, non-concurrent execution, can do like 30 to 50K TPS basically, because there's just not, the transactions are basically like the most simple possible transaction you can have on the Ethereum blockchain. And then as time goes on, of course, it gets, transactions get more complex. The blocks have less and less transactions in them, or at least the gas of each individual transaction goes up, so the block can have less transactions, and that the performance slows down significantly. And then you get to recent history where you have sort of these ZK rollups and stuff. And so they're proving, they're submitting a transaction with a massive amount of gas limit, and they're proving something basically. And those are extremely expensive transactions. And so, we even think that some of those are basically like the opcodes are mispriced because they should be more expensive than what Ethereum charges for them. But so yeah, in order to like make sure that, in order to monitor how Monad is performing amongst different sort of types of transaction sets, we replay across different segments of history, and all those results are like constantly posted, and people can look and see, okay, did I speed up? Did I slow down? Does my change speed it up? Does my change slow it down? That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we slow it down just because maybe it's a better sort of design of the software or something. So we're not strictly like 100% like performance at all costs sort of thing. But the consensus part is not Ethereum at all. It's some combination of these different sort of like BFT papers, hot stuff, and Jolteon, and then we have some original research as well that's coming out soon. The testnet, some of the components of testnet you asked about, like what's still there, like there's some of it's still in progress. For example, the staking module is not fully baked out yet, so the staking with the 57 validators currently is just kind of like hard coded. So somebody's working on that. We'll roll that out, and then every epoch, the consensus will read the stake weights and basically come up with a leader schedule. So it's not a super complex sort of software. It's just you got something you just want to be like, make sure that's 100% correct and there's no sort of bugs in that. So some of that stuff is still in progress for Mainnet.
Mm-hmm. And what's the sort of main transition point into a mainnet system in general? Like, I don't know, maybe this is different for every protocol. Maybe there's a standard moment in which that happens. How do you view it?
Yeah, there's just well, first of all, there's things outside of like our control that just have to be done. Audits, it's if you want to run a audit contest or something, there's that sort of stuff. Arranging sort of schedules with partners or that sort of thing. There's always, of course, legal stuff. Unfortunately, that's one of the big things in blockchain. Just tons of legality stuff.
So much, yeah. Hopefully that gets a little less onerous here.
Yeah, but yeah, it's. I would love to just flip the switch and call testnet mainnet and like run with it. Like, I would love to just do that today. Just like, okay, maybe we'll just reset. Because it's all fake, like USDC and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. We'll just reset it and just turn it into mainnet like today. I would love that, but yeah, there's just a lot of stuff. It's not. When people may get frustrated with timing, but they have to realize that a lot of it's just not really something that we can control or speed up, right? The audits and stuff, they take time. Like all this stuff takes time, and you're reliant on other people's schedules and other people's staffing levels and other people's sort of stuff, and you got to allow time to incorporate feedback and do fixes and all that stuff, and so it's just not. Yeah,
people don't get it as a distributed system, and not just at the technological level, but also at the human social level. So it's a hard coordination problem, man.
Yeah, so it's a hard coordination problem, and labs and foundation are split now, and so labs is just very much like head down technology. Foundation is doing everything foundation does, and so there's even coordination now between sort of labs and foundation that needs to be done, because it's not the same. It's not a single organization. It's two separate entities, and the ultimate goal of any of this stuff is like decentralization, right? Where no single person, no single entity has control of the blockchain, and it's an autonomous sort of functioning system that people can use. And to set that up is a hard thing, and I don't think anybody's totally figured that out yet, right? DAOs works sometimes and sometimes they don't. Like you get very sort of like weird outcomes out of DAOs and all that sort of stuff as well. So I don't think it's a solved problem by any means.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But hey, good thing there are folks like yourselves and your team on the frontier trying to kind of keep pushing for new versions of all this, because I think going back to your example of the Google employees that aren't doing much, I think it's way worse for the industry to stagnate than for folks to actually give things a strong go. And yeah, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I to that point, I think like things have just been pretty inefficient. The industry has a problem with sort of scammy behavior. There's a lot of people talk about like what they used to talk about Geth forks or something. People used to make jokes about all L1s or just copy paste sort of things. And I think as the industry matures, like capital should get more efficient. People should be less tolerant of nonsense, and that will really accelerate like innovation, development. If you really want this industry to win, you shouldn't. People should stop enabling these sort of like just scammy behavior, because it's just wasting. What it wastes is time and capital, right? Like people are. To me, it's less.
And goodwill.
People are getting rich. They shouldn't get rich, but that's not even a thing. Like they're sucking money that could be put to productive use. So you're turning potential productive capital into non-productive capital, and that's bad for the industry.
Yeah, this is something I bounce around quite a bit, because I completely agree. There's a lot of folks who in a more efficient world would not be making even close, if any, of the money they're making here now. And a lot of that money's leaving the system and it's not getting injected back in. But at the same time, this sort of low criteria investment that people do and throw into this space, it does allow for folks that are actually trying to do good work like yourselves and like other teams to be able to go and get the capital they need to do it. So it's like this, I don't know, I guess maybe this happens a lot with new technology, and it happened with the .com bubble where money got thrown at everything, but over time these real emergent victors came out.
Yeah, you could in the late 1990s you could put .com on the end of anything and raise $20 million sort of thing. Pets.com, that's a real company, I guess, but whatever. Bottle.com, I'm going to sell bottles, and so I'm going to bottle.com. You could raise $20 million.
Yeah.
Things were pretty nuts in the late 1990s too. And then there was a big crash, and there was, around, was it 99 or 2000, there was a big crash, kind of wiped out all that nonsense. And yeah, some obvious sort of winners came out of that.
Yeah.
Why hasn't that happened in crypto yet fully? Like, we've gone through these cycles. Like, why does it keep coming back is kind of something that perplexes me.
Yeah. I mean, there are some large players who have entrenched themselves pretty well in the space. Like obviously Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, they've gotten, I wouldn't say things like Solana have fully broken out and gotten there yet. There's still a lot of space, but there are folks who have gained some maturity over the cycles. I think the question for me is, will we see the same with applications on the networks, with things people are like the end consumer, regular people are wanting to use, or if the value is just going to continue to attribute to the network layer versus the applications built on top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ultimately, the application should be what owns the relationship with the customer, right? And I think some founders agree with this. Is like blockchain should almost be transparent in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you want some. They need to understand. Consumers need to understand enough to know, like, there's security there. Like, there's this thing that's behind there that's basically ensuring that somebody can't run off with your money, or this sort of thing. And so people kind of I think people intuitively sort of know that exists in the TradFi world, like your clearing houses, your these sorts of things that are massive sort of like institutions. Like so many brokerages use like Apex clearing or something, right? Like this massive clearing company, and billions or maybe even trillions of dollars of stock are sitting in this company, and people don't. The average person, trader, user, retail trader, or whatever, doesn't really know that thing is what that thing is or what the legal.
Oh yeah, in their mind, like Robinhood is selling them the stock, and like that's kind of as far.
But they still kind of do have like this intuition, like behind the scenes, like Robinhood can't just take my stock and run off with it, right? Like they kind of have that, like they know there's something behind there that's like protecting them from that, and. Of course, that in crypto, I think people thought like, okay, FTX can't run off with my shit, but it turns out they can. So they were kind of translating like that protection that exists in the sort of TradFi world.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because they were translating it to the centralized company in crypto versus the distributed systems in crypto, where that would be more true. This is one of my issues with a lot of the L2s and whatnot, is that you don't necessarily have those guarantees that you get from using real distributed networks. And I'm curious how you think about it, because in my view, and tell me if you think of this differently, Monad is going to be really impactful for the EVM space, because it's going to be really hard to, if everything works, if you guys launch successfully, if the TPS is there, it's going to be really hard for people to justify not using Monad in the EVM space. So how do you think the interaction is going to go down between that and the other folks? Is it going to become a very competitive battle? Do you think there will be space for multiple?
Yeah, I do think about this a bit. Like, are the L2s competing more with each other, or are they competing more with like an L1, like Monad? Are they who's actually competing with who?
Mm-hmm.
And what's kind of the landscape of like applications and stuff? I'm not like totally fundamentally opposed to L2s as long as they're implemented properly. I think the main problem there is just liquidity segregation. The main problem is the current state of L2s, which is like you got multi-sigs, you got all this sort of like nonsense, which is the same as running like an FTX or something. Like if 2 or 3 people can get together and rug the whole thing, then that's basically the same sort of thing. And so, but assuming that the L2s were, up to that current stage, whatever, I don't know what the stage is.
Fraud proofs or whatever.
Yeah, and I think the problem there is there's probably are some valid use cases for L2s in certain circumstances, but the main problem that I see as a regular daily user is there's just no, for what I do, which is more about yield and interest rates and that sort of thing, there's just not the liquidity there. Probably the L2 that I interact with the most would be Arbitrum, and I just, even then, I interact with it the most, but I don't really use it that often, maybe once every couple of weeks or something, every few weeks. So these are not, and then I would say NFT wise, there's some NFTs that have launched on Base that I've bought. There's some NFTs that launched on Abstract. I'm not sure if Abstract is an L2 or an L1, but I bought some NFTs there. So from that perspective, I've used those. But yeah, I think when you look at some of these L2s, like if you go to that sort of chart of like TPS, so we're doing like 1 TPS a second, or 1 TPS, right? Like they're not being used. And so every L2 that launches, if it goes out and it has a BD team and a marketing team and all this stuff, which it needs to do to try to track protocols and users and stuff, who are they taking away from? Well, they're probably not taking away from Ethereum much. They're probably most likely taking away from another L2. Would be my guess. No, I could be wrong. Somebody might.
No, I think that's right.
Yeah. So
just because it's very contextually the same space for people.
Right. So. I think it's kind of like this graph of competition, and Monad has some node in there. But I think like what are all the connections, competition sort of connections in that graph that don't involve Monad, I think is also very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of is going to decide what happens. I do see, I think people will go to Twitter and say that they're competing with Monad because Monad has a lot of attention and they want to like latch onto that attention. So they want to leverage that attention, but their actual competition might not actually be, their main competitor might not actually be Monad. The main competitor may be somebody else. So
one of the biggest issues I have with L2 is from a user's perspective is just the flow of funds between like Ethereum and Arbitrum, for example, or Ethereum and Optimism. And I'm curious, how will sort of bridge flow of funds work for Monad? If I have some Ethereum L1 ETH and I move that over or want to move it back, how are you guys structuring that?
Well, there'll be a native bridge which is being built by third party.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say who's building it because I'm not sure if that's public. That'd be like a Keone sort of question, but yeah, there'll be a native bridge for that sort of stuff, and there might be the faster bridges which are more like liquidity pools on each side, that sort of thing. I'm not sure. Yeah, I haven't really talked to people that much about that sort of thing. And then you get kind of like your stable coin bridges, like what's the Circle one? I'm drawing a blank.
CCTP.
Yeah, CCTP, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's a good. And then if you get good exchange listings, then those also serve as bridges. That puts you in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, true. Like you go through, Coinbase. You go through Coinbase to get to. That's what I do if I move stuff to Solana from Ethereum. I just go to Coinbase. I go through Coinbase, right? So.
Same. I mostly, not always, but a lot of the time exchanges serve as, I would guess, the most used bridges in the space.
If you want anonymity between your wallets on the two chains, then you want to use like an exchange. Of course, it's not anonymous to them. They know that those two wallets are connected in some way, but
yeah,
just general like people just doing like on-chain analytics sort of thing. So yeah, I'll use Coinbase for that purpose. If I wanted to buy like a NFT that's on Solana, I'll send some USDC from Ethereum to Coinbase, buy some Sol, send the Sol to my Solana NFT wallet and buy it. And, to everyone else.
I like that you're into NFTs. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? A former lifetime trader, building a blockchain, likes NFTs. I wouldn't model you as like the typical lifelong trader, to be honest, James.
Well, the first NFT I got was the Milady.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you knew the story of that, where I bought the Milady maker's Milady, like the one that he kept. And
the actual person.
Yeah. I have slow recall, but I can't remember his name. But I bought the artist, and he had a falling out with the other founder and whatever. But I bought through one of my friends. He started talking to him, and we just did a trade like I don't know, OTC or whatever. Right? It was not listed. And we talked, and it took like months. We just chatting, and I wasn't gonna buy it, and he didn't want to sell it, and so we chatted for months. That was my first NFT. And this is the Milady that's like in all the other collections. So like if you look at other collections where there's like a Milady that appears. It's like this Milady, right? So it's like I think it started with like I want to buy like one of the more famous sort of NFTs. Is kind of where like the conversation. And there's some brainstorming.
Some provenance to it, right? You couldn't just go to the marketplace. There had to be some lore.
There had to be some lore, and I think the lore is really cool, and it's so weird. Like I never thought, but I kind of have almost like an emotional attachment to this thing, right? Like it's just weird to have an emotional attachment to this picture. But do you know the Milady that I own? I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it on Twitter. We'll have Hey Kyle.
It's my Twitter at PFP, of course. Yeah.
Kyle, throw this up on. We'll put it on your face for the episode recording so people can see it as well.
Yeah, so you get this emotional attachment, and then one of my good friends, he sends me, he'll send me NFT collections. Some launched on this scatter.art. I don't know if you're familiar with that, and I'm a little bit particular about what type of NFT that I like. But yeah, I've bought some more and just accumulated some. And yeah, it's kind of fun.
Well, for the Monad NFT communities, they know they need to hit you up. Make James some honoraries for his collection.
Yeah, it's funny. Right before this cast, I was talking one of the guys on Twitter, I'm like, I like this, and it was sold out on Monad Testnet. And he's like, oh, I'll send you one of my personal ones. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to take one of your personal. I feel bad, take one of your personal. I'll just buy one when it goes to Mainnet, sort of thing. And he's like, no, I'll send you one. So after we finish this, I'm gonna go check my wallet and see.
Nice. See if it arrived.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah. Send me a screenshot after. I've honestly been really pleasantly surprised seeing how much testnet activity you guys are getting, because for the listeners, once they move to mainnet, all these assets go poof. There's a reset of everything that's happening here right now, but people are like committed to the hilt on this stuff. It's kind of incredible.
Yeah, I don't know how honestly I don't know how the NFT stuff works. Like, are they just do they do it like, is this a test collection? They do a new collection on mainnet and then they sell them. I don't know how it works, but yeah.
I have no idea how they'll do it, because I haven't really seen this type of rollout. But I think it's very optimistic, because one of the criticisms I've seen about you guys is that there's a lot of fabricated community. People are just there for the airdrop. It's not going to translate into network usage necessarily. But now that there's something for people to play with, they're playing with it. That's really positive.
Yeah, and as far as I know, there's no incentives or anything that stated incentives. So. I think when you do the points sort of thing, people know how to earn the points, right? And then they bot it, or they create mini accounts. Like, is it going to be linear? Is it not going to be linear? Okay, I need to create 1,000 accounts, and each account needs to do some activity because it's not linear.
And inevitably, someone tells a friend about what the system is, and then they'll tend to tell a friend, and it kind of just trickles outward. Yeah, it's really hard.
And then recently, those things have just disappointed, right? Like, people build up in their mind an expectation of, like, based on, okay, I got this many points, I did these activities, I kind of expect this, and you'll see people will post like screenshots of even like spreadsheets, like, okay, if the FTV is this, if the FTV is that, and okay, how many points, and then they'll have like this estimated value, and like this is a full-time job for some people, just like predicting like how much airdrop.
And people crushed it like through this last year where there's been quite a few airdrops. There have been people who have made, I know people just on hype alone that made 8 figures off the drop.
Yeah.
So it's pretty incredible. It's only in crypto.
Yeah. But a lot of them have disappointed too. There's been some that I'm not a farmer, but I use some of these that are pre, and I see like, how many points I get or whatever, and then the airdrop comes and it's like $30, and I'm like, if the capital I put on there relative to like the usage relative to like that, it's like, and I'm not complaining because I wasn't using it. I was never farming anyway, so
yeah.
if I, I'm happy to get anything above zero. Like I just,
I mean, you got
I'm
negative
not,
yield because prices probably went down 50% during that interim as well. So like,
well, I usually do like the deposit. I'm more like the user of the protocol. So yeah, I'm not really putting,
you're putting
I'm not
stables in there.
yeah, I'm not, yeah, stables and stuff. I'm not, or, yeah, I'm not really putting like, any sort of risk on like price risk, but if you go to these discords and stuff and people are like super upset, they're like, oh my God, I've been working on this for 6 months and I spent 8 hours a day for 6 months and I got like $50. Like, what the hell? They're expecting like 20,000 or something.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. For Monad, since it's a proof of stake network, does the mainnet launch require the token to be live already so folks can put stake on validators, or how does that work?
yeah, the token would have to be live for there to be staked validators. Yeah, the leader schedule comes from the stake.
Right. And so there will be like, yeah, and then the validators will spin up around the same time, and then there'll be some delegation to these validators, which seems like you guys have quite a few around the world. And these are the same people who will roll up into mainnet as well, right?
So a lot of this, again, this is kind of the split between foundation and labs. So yeah, I'm not really part of that planning, but I can tell you how the technology works. But
Yeah, yeah.
as
That's
far as like that
more than enough.
logistics, right? So yeah, there's staking, obviously, delegation, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, for the somebody will have to stake what foundation does with delegation or that sort of stuff. I don't know. Can't comment.
Yeah.
There's no. But yeah, distribution wise, when we test, we have, we'll set up with a network with like nodes in New York and nodes in Singapore, for example, and we'll put significant stake in the Singapore node, and we'll see how the thing performs. And so we're definitely building a global system, not one of these, we're like,
They're all co-located in Tokyo.
yeah,
AWS.
more than 2/3 of the stake is in like a region where the latency is like tens of milliseconds, sorry, tens of milliseconds, and so you get this really awesome performance, even with a really suboptimal sort of consensus algorithm, because like you have almost no latency.
Yeah.
Whereas we're planning for 100 some milliseconds of latency between these nodes, and so.
Well, that's the cost of a distributed system, right? Like that's the main difference. That's the trade-off, right? If I think of it correctly.
Yeah, it's if you want true sort of geographical distribution of stake, and I think totally makes this point too. It's also just like it's the distribution of information. It's like so many places that trade in New York, and you want to view it in Singapore. The network is providing that sort of like distribution of information, and hopefully in the most efficient way possible. So. It's a globally sort of distributed thing, and trading is global. We used to trade stuff in Singapore, stuff in New York, stuff in Chicago, stuff in Europe, Germany, Eurex, this sort of stuff. And at an HFT firm, you're sending like signals across the world in the lowest sort of latency wires across the ocean. Within land, you have microwave towers and all that sort of stuff. So you're basically trying to move that information as quickly as possible from one location to the other, because those assets are correlated. And if you can react faster than the people, you can make money. So, in a way, what's happening in blockchain is sort of similar. Like there's users all over the world. There's a bunch of natural activity that's happening all over the world, and you have to, the blockchain is serving the purpose of like sending those signals.
Mm-hmm. What are the tech requirements if I wanted to host a Monad validator? Do you have a scope for that or not yet?
Yeah, so we use like the main CPU we usually test with consumer is like an AMD 7950. the reason we use that one is it's high clock speed. It's low core count, high clock speed. It's
What does that
relatively
do for you?
What's that?
What does it do for you for it to be, what do you say, low clock count, high torque speed?
So yeah, we don't need a lot of cores. We prefer high clock speed versus core. So there's in CPUs there's a sort of like trade off. Like CPUs that have a lot of cores usually have low clock speed, and CPUs that have high clock speed usually don't have a lot of cores. And so if we have to choose between a lot of cores or higher clock speed, we choose higher clock speed. And so the 7950 is a consumer CPU. I can't remember the price. It's $500 or $600. I'm not sure where you can buy that now.
Mm-hmm.
They have enterprise versions of that, which is basically the same exact CPU. I don't know if you knew this or other people know this listening to the podcast. Like Intel and AMD, they manufacture chips, and then like the ones that maybe are buggy or less reliable, sometimes those become like the consumer. Like they build in these sort of like defect rates, right? And
yeah. It's like being able to have a certain amount of rat in your tomato sauce because they're in the factory or whatever.
yeah. It's like, like you manufacture 20 core CPU and you notice, like 2 of the cores don't work, so you sell it as a 16 core CPU. Like you just disable the other cores, so it's that sort of thing. So rather than throw it away, you just sell it as a lower model. So they kind of build like these defect rates into. So there's that. The memory requirements are actually, I think, pretty reasonable. I think on the website we put like 32 gigabytes, but it can be less. I think we'll get it down to like 16 or less. So memory used to be one of the most expensive pieces of the hardware. We use 2 SSD drives, although technically we could get by with 1. It just makes it easier to sort of like segment the disk and behavior and that sort of thing. And so just to keep things safe right now and kind of like not have to deal with the OS using the disk while the software is using the disk, we ask for 2 drives. But yeah, that's basically it. I think you can buy that. Like you could certainly build it or buy it for probably like $1,200 or something. I'm not sure. Do
you need a crazy internet connection?
No. So we target like the block rate is targeted at 100 megabit per second.
Oh, that's not bad.
So if you want to be a validator, though, there's an encoding which applies a multiplier to the size of the data. So right now that's 3x. So if you really want to be if you want to propose blocks, you need to have 300 megabit upstream, assuming you want to fill the block. There's no requirement that you fill the block. Like if you could run the software on a 100 megabit connection, the problem is you'd only be able to fill 1/3 of the block, and maybe that's enough, right? Like depending on demand. We hope demand is such that the thing is
every block is full.
Yeah,
use all the
every block is full, but so there's that. If you just want to run like a regular full node or something, where you just want to validate at home but you don't want to propose, you need less bandwidth because you're not sending this sort of multiplied data.
Have you guys decided the minimum Monad stake for a validator, or how does that work, I guess?
Yeah, so there's still some implementation work that needs to be done to get to thousands of nodes. Basically, the cryptography is what gets expensive, right? When you're trying to aggregate signatures across thousands of signatures, that is very expensive.
Each signature being a separate node, essentially, right?
Yeah, like a vote, right? Like
okay.
So there's ways of dealing with all that sort of stuff, but right now the nodes send their votes to the leader aggregates and provides the aggregated sort of signature, and so that kind of limits things to like a couple hundred nodes. So when Mainnet launches, it'll still be very likely still be a couple hundred nodes. So the stake presumably, and again this isn't totally decided, but the stake would just be like the top 200 stake nodes. So if you were,
I mean, 200 is nothing to frown at. It's a lot.
yeah, it's still like
for a starting point.
like
That's
the max
respectable.
sort of like Cosmos decentralization or something, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we want to get to Solana and Ethereum level, 3,000 or more sort of hardware, sort of physical validators.
Is there a mempool? How does MEV work on Monad?
There's no mempool. There's a local mempool, which is your local view, sort of like what transactions are in flight or submitted pending, what their status is. But there's no global mempool.
And when you say local, you mean your view as a validator?
Yeah, like transactions that have come through your validator has seen these transactions, but that sends to the predicted leaders. It's very similar to Solana, where like when I was doing Pith on Solana, we would send. It's probabilistic, right? Like you don't know exactly what the validator is receiving that's building in the next leader blocks. Like you have the schedule, but the timing is so tight. And so what we did is we would just send to like -1, 0, and +2 or something. So we would send to like 3 or 4 leaders, and then hopefully the actual leader was sitting within that set.
Yeah.
And it usually was, almost always sitting within that set. So that way you increase the chance that you're hitting the actual current leader. And so Monad is very similar to that. You have a leader schedule, it's rotating, leaders are proposing blocks, and you want to get your transaction in, you need to send to that leader. And then, of course, maybe for some reason, latency or other reasons, by the time your thing arrives there, it's not that leader, or that leader's passed, or it hasn't become that leader yet. So you actually send to multiple leaders, potential leaders, and hopefully you hit the one. So
yep.
Yeah, there's no mempool. You will only see the transaction when the leader sends it out.
Do you think it's likely there then is a Jito-like entity in the Monad ecosystem that basically works with all the validators to create some tipping/bundling system to give higher guarantees of transactions landing with the leaders?
Yeah, I think there's some projects. There are projects that are setting up for that now for Monad. Honestly, I don't have a lot of insight yet into what they're doing. I would love to look into it and talk to them more. I just don't. Like my day is swamped.
Yeah, you're like, I need to get this shit out. Fuck all the rest for now.
A lot of this stuff I just know like surface level, just because I just can't keep up. Other members of the team may know better than me, but yeah, I just don't. But yeah, that there is that. There is that stuff in the works. Yeah.
Last couple questions, James, before I let you get back to your late night coding. What's your primary focus right now? I mean, obviously there's a whole management side, but is there one part of the tech stack that you're just deep in?
Yeah, we're rebuilding our database. So the database started out as more like a research project, and the lead engineer on the database right now is started as an intern.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
She implemented a lot of stuff, but a lot of it was just kind of like evolutionary, and so it was patches on top of patches, fixes on top of fixes, and we learned a lot. It's kind of clunky. I feel bad for people who run validators right now because a lot of the software is just clunky. Clunky meaning like it has to be set up in a certain way. If something goes wrong, it's not easy to diagnose. It's that sort of thing. And there is several sort of suboptimal performance behaviors in the current database. For some things, it's extremely fast. For some things, it's slow. And so we're kind of doing two things. One thing is any kind of idea that we can backport to the existing database, we're backporting that. There's an
Sorry,
example.
what does backporting mean?
Backporting means like it's a piece of code that we would include in the new database, but we're integrating that idea into the existing database as well. So we'll add it to the new, but we'll also go back to the existing V1 and put it there as well. So there's like a change that increases performance of replay by like 20%. Like that's very significant, right? So that's something we're going to try to incorporate now. But yeah, in the meantime, we're trying to build out the second version of the database, which should be a lot more performant, a lot less clunky, and easier on everybody's like usage, and also it's just kind of like general purpose. I think what's very noticeable about our database as opposed to blockchains that have high RAM resource requirements is that our database memory, I think right now, like uses like a gigabyte of memory.
Oh, it's like nothing. Is that just because there hasn't been that much happening yet, or what's the reason?
No, it's because we just rely very heavily on disk performance. So rather, some of the other clients and other chains, they just say, okay, we're gonna use 16 gigabytes of RAM for the database, and so they just try to keep it. They try to keep most of the database in memory. Solana was this sort of thing at the very beginning. I think the resource requirements have dropped a lot now, but I don't know if you remember like the early Solana, to run a validator, you had to have 256 gigabytes of RAM, right?
That's and indexing was fucking impossible.
Yeah, it's a data center basically box, right? Most people don't. Very, very few people will ever have a home machine in 2021 with 256 gigabytes of RAM. Like that's just very much a data center sort of thing. And so, a lot of chains, some of the L2s, they're just throwing tons of RAM at the problem. We'll just run on a very beefy box with a ton of RAM. The problem is that's not really decentralized. Like if the box is not easily attainable or usable by the average person, it's not really decentralized. And so it was always our goal to use as little as memory as possible and rely on the disk as much as possible. And these modern SSDs, which you may probably see me talk about before, are just like amazing little computers to themselves. And the next gen, which is coming out, the PCIe 5, is even crazier. And so these are like little massive, like sort of mini, little massive computational machines sort of thing. And they have a ton of throughput, and they have their own little software and OS and everything running on them. And it's hard to believe. It's like a computer within a computer. And so we just lean very heavily on that, and we try to get our performance from the disk rather than from just shoving everything into memory.
Yeah, that's really interesting that both Toli and you have worked on hardware problems before jumping into the blockchain space, and so now you get to kind of attribute that to the things that you need. I think that's really interesting. My last question for you, James, is as you said, you're balancing all these different things, sort of working in tandem with all the different teams and whatnot. Is there some life habit or tip other than the one about sort of looking at something important before going to bed that has kept you sane or made you more productive or made the startup life easier than it otherwise would have been?
I think sort of like taking mini breaks and resetting your mind is that's the first thing that popped in my mind just now is like, maybe you can't fully step away, but kind of mentally step away for a day or two. And I think that's super productive also, because when you're down in the weeds, it's you might start to lose sight of like what priorities are and that sort of thing. And if you just step back and then you like, just I don't know, take a day and go hang out with friends or something. Maybe you're still responding to Slack messages or Telegram, but just take a day and then just kind of step back mentally, and you come back and like you're kind of reset. You have a new perspective, right? And so you don't have to go away for a week. Like a week is overdoing it. A week might even be negative, utility. So, but I think a day or two, probably two at most. A day is probably sufficient. Just step back and like. Chill out, give the mind a break, come back in, and I think you'll have a lot of times have a very different perspective than you had when you sort of before you took the break. So I think that can be super useful, super productive.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. Completely agree. And thanks so much for coming on the show, James. It was a very great conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great. Nice to meet you too.